Welcome to our Urban Legends podcast. I'm Dr. Gloria McDaniel Hall. I've been a teacher, a principal, and assistant superintendent, all within urban schools in Chicago and around the country. Our Urban Legends podcast is a forum for sharing ideas, strategizing together, and supporting each other as we dismantle the deficit narratives sometimes associated with urban education and discuss where and how amazing work is being done. So welcome everyone to another episode of the Urban Legends podcast. And you know, our purpose of the Urban Legends podcast is to find people, find programs, find resources for people who are doing outstanding work so that we can change the narrative about what happens in our schools. And so I got to tell you, I was on vacation, actually trying to hide from the world. And I was walking on a beach where nobody was supposed to know where I was. And I run into none other than a student who recognized me by my voice because, of course, I was laughing or saying something. I don't know what I was doing, but it was randomly on a beach in Jamaica a couple of months ago. And I decided right then that I was going to need to have him be a guest because of the relationship that we had working together. I was his instructor in the doc program, and now he is Dr. Clint Alexander. So without further ado, I introduce you to Dr. Clint, and he's going to tell us a little bit about his journey in education and like what made him decide to become a school leader.
Yes. So, hey, thank you for having me, Doc. And that story is a true story. We can't make that up. We decided to have a getaway. I was with the wife, and we were trying to find out who was going to take our picture on the shoreline. And I heard this familiar voice with my back turned. I turned around just to verify, and it was Dr. McDaniel Hall. So now that's a true story. It sounded kind of fairy tale-ish, but no, that happened. And so I thank you for your time and everything that you've done to serve your community and how you inspired me at National Louis. So
thank you.
Yep. So I'm Dr. Clint Alexander. I'm a lifelong learner. I want to start there. I'm a vessel for the Most High. So I'm a man of God first, and then I'm a lifelong learner second. Proud father, proud husband, and so. On this journey, I'm committed to equity. And so I've dedicated my career to bringing educational equity to the classroom, to the organizational structure, to the district structure, to the community, to make sure that all kids have equal access to learning, to resources and to post-secondary endeavors. So within doing that, my dissertation focus is also within the realm of equity. Dealing with culturally responsive teaching practices. So it measures the extent of the pedagogy's influence on professional development, designed to increase collective teacher efficacy. So, if we can influence our teachers collectively to believe a certain way through the influence of equity practices, imagine how strong the belief can be about equity. Because some people don't even think it's a real thing. They think it's a feel-good thing, but like when you have practices and you put money and resources behind it to where the collective staff believes about it, then, you're getting somewhere, you got some traction. So that's what we're trying to do. That's my aim within my dissertation focus. And that's my aim throughout, my career from this point out. So that's where I am. I've been in education for about 15 years now. So I'm about halfway there.
So this idea of equity isn't one of the questions that I've prepared, but to me, it feels like we've changed everything like transactionally. Like we changed the standards, we changed how we evaluate teachers, we changed when we test, we changed how we test, we changed all the stuff except for the mindset of the people who are in front of our children. How did you start to even have those conversations? Because it's so difficult. I found that people really just try to do the transactional part and they don't get into that deep work where we examine our own ideas about what equity actually means.
Yeah, yeah. You know what? And the thing about it is people, the transactional component makes it chequity and not equity. So in order to make it authentic equity, we have to have uncomfortable conversations. And that's what deters people because depending on the political landscape of your educational environment, like depending on how the board views it, depending on how the funding sources and the power brokers in your community views equity, it may not be safe to talk about in the way that can make it more transformational and not transactional.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, if we want to take it to the next level and be transformational with equity, we have to have that backing, that safety and security psychologically to have the capital to talk about those things. Otherwise, we'll be kind of skeptical and we'll just have that transactional thing because we know it's the right thing to do, but we won't press the issue.
Right.
So I think it's important that we have that alignment, from leadership on down. And if the community's down, that's a real good thing when the community is down for it. But if they're not down for it, if the board's not down for it, that kind of puts you at odds against how you approach and what your entry point is when it comes to that equity journey. So,
Love it. I never
mhm.
heard the term chequity, but that makes so much sense to me. So, okay, so now you are in a principal role in a suburban school in Illinois near Chicago. Number one, I got two questions. Number
Mhm.
one, I know you went through leadership training because I was there.
Mhm.
What weren't you prepared for that kind of happened? Because this isn't a situation, and I think a lot of people get tripped up during their first year because you think like you got an A. I know you got an A in almost everything you've always tried to do. This ain't a
Yeah.
situation where you get an A or A plus the first time you try it because you can't even plan for all the things that you got to deal with as a first year principal. What
Yeah.
advice would you give to someone in their first year?
You know what? This is my first year here, right? And so, like, I knew how to be principal before I walked in here, but I didn't know how to be principal here.
Here.
So, what I would say to a new person is that context is everything. Context is everything because you know what? The theory that we acquire through our curriculum and our programs, it teaches us to handle one component, but it doesn't marry that theory to practice. And my grandmother always used to tell me, even when I was younger, and I didn't understand it when I first heard it, but she said, "Boy, ain't no sense like bought sense." You know,
Wow.
that sense you got to pay for that sense. And so, figuratively speaking, metaphorically speaking, you pay for your knowledge sometimes because it kind of leaves you with you have to sacrifice something, or maybe it's your pride, but you pay for it with something. You barter for the knowledge that you get. And so walking into a new location, if you don't know the context, the landscape, the power brokers, and things that you need to know to make decisions, it could impede your learning curve. So, when they talk about the 90-day plans and the first 30 days of examining the organizational structure and building relationships to know the context, I think that's the biggest thing that you have to do when walking into a new situation because otherwise you could be misguided in some of your decisions if you kind of step in prematurely and act hastily. So that
Yeah.
would be my encouragement to new people
Yeah.
in new buildings.
I was just talking to a person who made some mistakes during his first year, but he did not make the mistake of not building the relationships with people. And he built
Mm-hmm.
so many relationships that they forgave all the other stuff and gave him another year. And during that second and third and fourth year, he really started to blossom. Like I think we see a lot of people leaving the profession in droves. The leaders are leaving kind of like teachers were years ago or and still are. And
Mm-hmm.
we're not really digging into why are our principals leaving. And
Yeah,
just like you said, there's no way in any course you could take that we could prepare you for all the context that you're going to go into. So
absolutely.
taking the time to actually learn that is
Yeah.
so vital.
Yeah, yeah, and that on the job learning is just critical because like you can be prepared as you want to be, but the nuanced behavior of each building is different. And so like you have to learn that language. It's a native language in every building that's distinctly different. And you just have to use your spidey senses and your emotional intelligence. You know, the Daniel Goldman book that we read,
Yeah.
you know, you have to be able to be socially aware, and you have to manage relationships, and you can't do that unless you're self-regulated and self-aware. So I mean, like when you walk into these spaces and you gotta read the room, you gotta read the district, you gotta read the departments, you gotta have that EQ to be able to make those deposits and transactions and withdrawals. So yes, definitely, definitely.
So what's one thing you're most proud of in your new role?
You know what? I am proud that I've stayed true to myself. And that means a lot is loaded, but I'll say this. I'll say that in certain spaces, sometimes you have to assimilate when it comes to appeasing certain populations of your organization. But I think that I've maintained my authenticity when it comes to my beliefs about leading. And I think that it's a good time for me to lead here because it was a certain time that my beliefs would not fit in here. And I'll talk about the belief. The belief is about educational equity for minoritized youth. And so my stance about equity comes at a good time to be here because at one point, and in a lot of this is for a lot of districts, it wasn't really accepted widely. So
Right.
It's a good time to be an agent of change and to be an ambassador for equity. So I'm thankful that I was received with open arms with my stance, and that I'm thriving by being my authentic self. So I really appreciate that, and I'm grateful to God for allowing me this space because it didn't have to be this way. So
Awesome. So
uh-huh.
here's another question that wasn't on our list. Because you've done that, all the research that you've done for your doctorate around that topic of equity, if you were to suggest a resource to people who are in a principal training program, um, one book.
Ooh, okay. One book. You know what? It's like, how do you choose
How do
one?
you choose?
Because I got three or four that's at the top of my brain.
Okay.
But you know what? When it comes to leadership, though, and when it comes to equity, I believe that I like Muhammad Khalifa's culturally responsive leadership
Yes.
because it gives you a scope of how to structure a vertically integrated program throughout the school, because teaching is the last cycle of being culturally responsive, because it has to be funded. You have to have the vision. It has to be funded. The strategic plan has to be written, right? And then it lands as a destination. It arrives in the classroom in which you could provide a professional development environment to implement what the vision started as. So he kind of talks about starting with the community, creating awareness and buy-in and understanding the surface, deep, and shallow levels of culture within your community,
Yes.
leveraging that capital, and then coming throughout the organization, and the final destination ends up in the classroom. So it gives leaders the toolkit to broker different tools to get into the classroom. A lot of people say, okay, culturally responsive teaching statically by itself, it can never get into the classroom without leadership.
Right.
And leadership has to have the proper entry point in order to get it there as a final destination.
Right.
And so it's like maybe 4 steps in between actually arriving into the classroom. So I like that book for leaders.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. That I
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that book too.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So
Yeah.
we talked a little bit about having a coach or a mentor, and what we found in all the work that we've been doing, and National Lewis providing coaches and mentors for certain principals in CPS is that prior to us taking on this initiative, it seemed like, okay, once somebody got their principal's license and they're in the school, like that is it, or they got their superintendent's license and they're superintendent of a district, that is it. But I feel like the more I learn, it feels like the more everybody, all of us, need a coach or a mentor. And I think you were telling me about somebody who is providing that for you. Why is
Yes.
that so important?
You know what? Because if we are lifelong learners, we can't be the smartest people in our crew. If we are, then we need to find another network. Like you need to find another network. If you have the most wealth of knowledge and you have the highest
Mm,
fund of knowledge, then you need to seek someone else or another crowd because only live things grow. And if you're not growing, that implies that you're dying, right? And so proverbially, just like as a metaphor, if we're alive and we're growing, then that means that we have to have someone around us that will stretch our imagination, stretch our capacity. And so I'm a relatively new principal. This is my 4th year being a principal. And so I understand that, hey, if I'm going to be an expert of my craft, then I need to have someone that's more experienced, has a different purview, that is, wiser, right? And so I have an elder mentor, and I have a mentor that is a similar age range, but
mm,
has more experience, than me. So I have about 3 or 4 different mentors, and I consider myself blessed. And my superintendent currently, my supervisor, my boss, he is a mentor to me as well.
that's
So
awesome.
but it's a philosophy and commitment to growth that I have that allows me to seek that organically, and being an athlete, in college and high school, it's kind of given me that, it's embedded that philosophy that you have to have feedback. I have to have feedback, and I think that's a good characteristic that leaders should have. And it happened to just work for me in that way because of my background. But you have to be familiar to feedback and embrace feedback. A lot of people don't want to hear the ugly truths, right? But that's what grows you. Whenever somebody is building, affirming you all the time, it doesn't really give you the opportunity to reflect, but when somebody gives you some critical feedback that you need to think about, then you reflect on that moment to grow. And I think that is the it's like a juxtaposition, because it's like, the same thing that makes you laugh makes you cry, because
Mm,
on one end you grow from the critical feedback, and on the other end it kind of stings and pierces the ego. So
mm.
as leaders, we have to have humility to understand that we're not the end all be all, and once we get over ourselves, we can grow. You know what I'm saying? But if you're in your own way,
You in your own way, for
yeah, when you're
real.
in your own way, it's hard to grow when you're in your own way. So,
Yes,
once you step to the side and allow yourself to grow and embrace the feedback and the experiences of others, I think it just works to a better experience overall for the leader. So,
awesome.
mhm.
Okay, so I end with a reflection on a quote. And once I spoke to you, I thought about James Baldwin. He said, and it kind of goes along with what you just said. His quote is, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced." What about that quote resonates with you and your work? And then how can leaders become brave enough to enact the changes that we need to see, that we know is best for our schools and communities?
Well,
It's
you
a
know
long
what?
question.
I love that quote. I love that quote. Read it to me one more time.
So, not everything that's faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced.
Absolutely. So when I hear that, I automatically think of courageousness, right? Um, because just because you face it doesn't mean you're going to change it, but it can't possibly be changed. The possibility is not even there, if you don't have the courage to face it,
Yeah.
you can't change it. So they say you can't conquer what you can't confront. and you can't confront what you can't confess, you know. So, in order to conquer something, you have to confront it and confess it. So you have to conceptualize that it is your truth. And so, as we pursue equity in the classroom space, uh, in the systemic space of education, we have to face the adversity of how that looks if we say this, or how does it look if we say that. And we have to deal with the reprisal and the consequences of people's, ill look scrutiny, or whatever we may face. And that's the risk, right? And so no guts, no glory. So if we don't put it out there, we won't see any movement. But probably the best time in educational history to stand on the shoulders of those who have paved the way for us to even have this conversation. We are on a digital platform talking about equity in a landscape that doesn't condemn us physically, right? Like, well, I can't say globally, like it is some outliers, right? It's still some things that we're facing, but our predecessors in the Jim Crow South couldn't have these conversations. And so the advancement I'm talking about is in the physical nature, where we don't deal with the same recourse physically, but there's still some systemic structures that we're trying to overcome. But nevertheless, that advancement, we have to even push it to the next level so that the generations after we get finished having these conversations, right?
Yes.
When we fold up these laptops and we look at all of those that we've impacted through our educational walk, like you've impacted me, then they need to be able to say that, Dr. Gloria and Dr. Clint gave me some nuggets of wisdom to help me advance it even more, so that we could be on that, we could eradicate systemic racism, because, it went from overt to systemic. And now we're trying to prevail over the systemic to bring pure equity,
Right.
to the classroom space. So
Right.
we got to confront it. We got to face it. And we have to galvanize with people who are like-minded to build the network, which is something that is challenging. I mean, and that's a whole nother conversation when it comes to building that network to face it, right? We could face it in silos, like you could face it in your neck of the woods, and I could face it in mine, but we're stronger together. So the solidarity that we need to really, really face it, right? Right. So to really embody what Baldwin was saying, I think the next step is galvanization, to really have a firmer stance, to go down to the Capitol and say, hey, we
Yes.
need something.
Yes.
We need something.
Yes. And
Mm-hmm.
it's so ironic. I'm in Memphis, and I always get a place to stay that's right near the Lorraine Motel, because I
Yes.
walk there. I walk there every time because I pay homage to Dr. King. Like, the bravery that they had to show. Sometimes when I look at things from the civil rights movement, I'm like, I don't know if I could have
Right.
done that at a lunch counter and just sat
Right.
there while people did it. Those were
Right.
some brave acts. And the things that you're doing are just, you're brave in your way, in the ways that you're trying to make things
Yes.
equitable for students. Like, it's just a different way of doing the work, but you're doing the work. And I
Thank
really
you, Doc.
appreciate, I'm so proud
Thank you,
of
Doc.
all that you've
You know
done.
what? That reminds me, my mom. So look, I got a relevant story. I kind of get off target sometimes, so you could always steer me straight. But my mom celebrated her 70th birthday a couple of days ago, and we had a party for her, right? And so we're sitting around a table with family and friends outside. Weather was beautiful, by the way. And my mom was saying, she was like, these kids have so much boldness and this new era. I look at my son, she pointed at me, and she was like, he was so bold. She was like, he's quasi rebellious, but it's in a way that's productive. It advances us. She was like, we didn't have that. And she was just kind of standing and kind of affirming me as her son. I said, Mama, I can't take all the credit. I said, because the context was different. I said, when you came up, you did just as much as I did. I said, it's because of what you did that I'm able to do
Do
what
what
I
I
I
do.
have to do, right? Because I said I have technology, I have some more rights and resources that you all advocated for that really allows my knowledge to be streamlined and my voice to be heard louder. I
Right.
said, but if it wasn't for the work that you all did with the sit-ins and the things that you all did that were not publicized across media sources,
Right.
I said I could not be able to do what I did. So I said, so it's apples to apples, really. It just looks different because the mediums that we use today can be seen by the world. I said, but nah, I can't really scratch the surface on what y'all
Right.
did for us.
Right.
So, you know, I pay homage to the people before us because, like you said, the Dr. Kings, that was way more difficult. And the risks were way higher than what we deal with today.
Right.
You
Even
know,
though ours is messed up, but like theirs was that was it's unreal what they had to live through, go through, just to be able to vote, just to be
yep,
able to sit at a lunch counter, just to be able
yes,
to. And the thing about our schools, and we need a part two on our conversation,
yeah.
because the thing about our schools is I feel like they're not segregated in the law, but they're segregated for the most part in a lot of places just
Oh
because
my
of,
goodness. Advanced placement,
yeah,
international baccalaureate,
oh yeah,
gifted programs.
oh yeah,
Oh yeah.
yeah.
Part
Part
two,
Thank
part
you
two.
so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Alexander. I am
Yeah.
so proud of the fact that you were in a class of mine. I don't even know what to say to you right now, but thank you so much for being
Hey,
on
well,
Urban Legends.
thank you for pouring into my life. It's been an honor, and I'm looking forward to part two.